Doctors gave up on him. They told his wife there was nothing left to do. But that night, when everything looked lost, one desperate prayer was about to change everything, in a way no one could explain. The rain fell steadily that night, tapping softly against the hospital windows, as if it carried a message no one inside could quite understand. In one of the quietest rooms on the third floor, Daniel lay motionless, his body weak and his breathing shallow. Machines beeped around him, counting each fragile second as though reminding the world that he was still alive, but barely. The doctors had already done everything they could. A few hours earlier, a group of specialists stood at the foot of his bed, speaking in hushed tones. Their faces were heavy, their voices careful, as if speaking too loudly might break something already beyond repair. "There's nothing more we can do," one of them finally said. Another sighed and added, "His organs are shutting down. We've exhausted all treatments." Daniel's wife, Miriam, stood nearby, her hands trembling. She didn't argue, she didn't question their conclusion, but something inside her refused to accept what they were saying. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "please don't stop trying." The lead doctor looked at her with quiet sympathy. "We're not stopping, we're just out of options." Out of options. The words echoed in Miriam's mind long after the doctors left the room. She turned to look at Daniel, her husband, her partner, the man who used to laugh so loudly that it filled their entire home. Now his face was pale, his lips dry, his body still. The man who once stood strong now seemed like a shadow of himself. But she remembered something he had told her years ago. Even when everything is gone, prayer still remains. Back then, it sounded like one of those comforting phrases people say without fully understanding its depth. But tonight, with everything slipping away, those words felt like the only truth she had left. Miriam pulled a chair beside his bed and sat down slowly. She took his hand in hers. It was cold. She closed her eyes. "God," she whispered, "I don't understand why this is happening, but I know you are still in control." Her voice trembled, but she continued. "They said there's nothing more they can do, but I believe you are not finished." A tear slid down her cheek. "If you can heal the blind, if you can raise the dead, then you can restore him. Please, don't let this be the end." Her prayer wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was sincere. And somewhere beyond the walls of that hospital room, beyond the limits of human understanding, something unseen began to move. Daniel had been admitted 2 weeks earlier. At first, it started as a simple illness: fatigue, slight fever, occasional dizziness, nothing alarming. He was a hard-working man, the type who didn't complain even when he should. He ignored the early signs, convincing himself that rest would fix everything, but it didn't. His condition worsened quickly. One day, he collapsed at work. By the time he was rushed to the hospital, things had already taken a serious turn. Tests were run, results came back, and the truth wasn't good. The doctors discovered a rare and aggressive internal condition that was rapidly affecting multiple organs. Treatment began immediately, but his body didn't respond the way they hoped. Day after day, his condition declined. And now, here he was, barely hanging on. Miriam had stayed by his side since the moment he was admitted. She barely slept, she barely ate. She spent her days watching him, praying, hoping, holding on to every sign of life she could find. But tonight felt different. Tonight felt final. And that is why her prayer carried a different weight. Meanwhile, in another part of the hospital, a nurse named Claire stood at the reception desk, staring at Daniel's file. She had been assigned to his case earlier that day, and something about it stayed on her mind. "He's critical," she had heard one of the doctors say, "but we're expecting a decline." Expecting a decline. Those words bothered her. She had worked in the hospital long enough to understand that sometimes medicine reached its limit. But she had also seen moments, rare, unexplainable moments, where patients defied expectations. Claire wasn't deeply religious, but she believed in something beyond science, something she couldn't fully explain. That night, as she finished her shift, she couldn't stop thinking about Daniel.
Without fully understanding why, she walked back towards his room.
Inside the room, Miriam continued praying. Her words grew softer, but her faith seemed stronger. God, if you can still hear me, please show mercy. Let him live. She paused, her eyes still closed. Then she whispered something else. Even if the doctors have given up, I haven't. At that moment, something shifted in the room. The machine monitoring Daniel's heart began to fluctuate. Claire, who had just reached the hallway, suddenly stopped. She looked toward the room. The beeping sound changed rhythm. Something was happening. She rushed inside. "Is everything okay?" she asked quickly. Miriam opened her eyes, startled. I don't know." Claire moved closer to the machine. Her eyes widened slightly. "This can't be," she murmured. Daniel's heart rate, which had been steadily declining, had suddenly stabilized. Not dramatically, not instantly healed, but improved. Claire checked the monitor again. "It's not normal," she said, "but his vitals are shifting." Miriam's heart began to race. "What does that mean?" Claire didn't answer immediately. She simply watched the monitor, as if trying to confirm what she was seeing. "I've seen patients stabilize before, but this is unusual." Miriam turned back to Daniel. "Daniel," she whispered. And then something happened. Daniel's fingers twitched. Miriam froze. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice breaking. Claire nodded slowly. "Yes." Miriam leaned closer, holding his hand tightly. "Daniel, if you can hear me, come back." His eyelids fluttered slightly. It was faint, but real. Claire quickly stepped out of the room and called for assistance. Within minutes, a small team of medical staff gathered. They checked the monitors, they examined his responses, they ran quick assessments. And then, one of the doctors said something that left everyone stunned. "He's improving." Miriam's eyes filled with tears. "Are you sure?" she asked, almost afraid to believe it. The doctor looked at her, then at the monitors again. "Yes," he said slowly, "there's no medical explanation for this." No medical explanation, but Miriam knew the answer. She looked upward, and in a quiet voice she said, "Thank you." Over the next few days, Daniel's condition continued to improve, gradually but consistently. The doctors monitored him closely. They adjusted treatments, they ran tests repeatedly, but nothing explained his recovery. His organs began functioning again, his strength slowly returned, his breathing improved. It was as though something had reached into his life and reversed what was once irreversible. Miriam remained by his side, but now her prayers shifted. No longer desperate, now grateful. "Thank you," she whispered each day. "Thank you for not giving up on him." Daniel eventually regained consciousness fully. The first thing he saw was Miriam sitting beside him, her eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. "Hey," she said softly. His voice was weak, but it carried a familiar warmth. "What happened?" Miriam shook her head gently. "You almost left me." He tried to move, but his strength was still limited. "I thought I was done." Miriam shook her hand gently. "They said there was nothing more they could do." Daniel looked at her confused. "But I'm still here." Miriam squeezed his hand. "Because God wasn't finished with you." Over the next few weeks, Daniel's recovery continued. By the time he was discharged, the doctors still couldn't explain what had happened.
One of them finally admitted, sometimes medicine doesn't have all the answers. Daniel smiled faintly. Maybe not, he said, but prayer does something medicine cannot. The doctor didn't argue. He simply nodded. Back at home, life slowly returned to normal, but something had changed. Daniel wasn't the same man who had entered the hospital weeks earlier. He carried a deeper sense of gratitude, a deeper understanding of life, a stronger faith. And Miriam, her faith had grown even stronger. She would often sit beside him and say, "Do you remember that night?" Daniel would smile. "The night I couldn't move?" Miriam would nod. "The night I prayed." Daniel would look at her with quiet admiration. That was the night everything changed. Miriam would shake her head gently. "No," she would say, "that was the night God reminded us that He is still in control."
Months later, Daniel stood in a small gathering, sharing his story. People listened intently as he spoke. They said there was no hope, he said, and they were right from a human perspective. He paused. But they forgot one thing. He looked at the crowd. They forgot that one prayer can change everything. The room fell silent. And in that silence, many hearts were touched. Because sometimes when all options are gone, when doctors have given up, when hope seems lost, one sincere prayer can still reach the one who never gives up.